No one expected a woman in her 70s to outbid half a dozen seasoned buyers, and certainly no one expected her to do it with hands that trembled not from fear but from a kind of long-buried excitement. Yet that was exactly the moment Helen Mercer found herself living, sitting at her small kitchen table, the soft hum of her old refrigerator behind her, watching the final seconds tick down on an online auction that felt less like a gamble and more like a door opening in the middle of her otherwise predictable life. The storage unit she was bidding on wasn't flashy or mysterious. It didn't promise gold bars or forgotten fortunes. What it held, at least according to the grainy photographs, was something far more meaningful to her: furniture. Real furniture. Heavy, carved, lovingly crafted wood that belonged to a different era, the kind her father once restored with hands that smelled of sawdust and varnish. For most bidders, the unit was a burden. It was packed tightly with tall wardrobes, solid oak dressers, sideboards with brass hardware, ladder-back chairs, and several end tables stacked carefully like someone who respected them had arranged it all. It looked expensive to move, tedious to resell, and hopelessly outdated in a world filled with flat-packed sets and laminate surfaces. But to Helen, who had spent her childhood sitting in her father's workshop, watching shavings curl away from the plane's blade like thin ribbons of honey-colored paper, the sight of those pieces did something she hadn't felt in years. It pulled her back to a version of herself she thought time had erased. Her father used to say that well-made furniture had a soul, and that the craftsmen who built it left a trace of themselves inside every joint, dovetail, and turning. Helen had believed him then, and a part of her still believed it now, even after decades of working ordinary jobs, paying ordinary bills, and living with the quiet loneliness that settled after her husband passed away. She wasn't poor, not exactly, but every dollar mattered. Every decision was weighed against practicality. There were no vacations, no spontaneous purchases, and certainly no hobbies that required money up front. She stretched what she had with careful discipline, and the world rewarded her frugality with stability, but not joy. The idea of bidding on a storage unit, especially one filled floor to ceiling, should have been impossible. And yet, a week earlier, while browsing a second-hand shop she loved, she overheard two customers talking about how sometimes people scored entire furniture sets from abandoned units for a fraction of their value. The words struck her like a small spark landing on something long dry. When she got home, she typed "local storage auctions" into her computer and found herself scrolling through listings late into the night, drawn not to the mystery boxes or electronics but to every glimpse of carved legs, worn tabletops, or hidden craftsmanship beneath the dust. Then she found it, the unit that seemed made for her. She clicked the photos over and over, examining small details: the curve of a cabriole leg, the floral inlay on a cabinet door, the dovetail joints peeking from an open drawer. Someone had cared deeply for these pieces. They were not junk, they were history. And the starting bid, though higher than she was comfortable with, was still far below what such furniture should have sold for individually. Her instinct, something she rarely allowed herself to follow, told her that this was a chance she might never see again. Still, she hesitated. Her savings weren't large, and spending even a small portion of them on a dream felt irresponsible. She told herself she was too old for risks, too sensible for impulses, too practical to chase nostalgia. She closed the listing twice. She made tea, walked around her quiet house, tried to forget the photographs, but each time she sat down, the image of those carefully stacked antiques returned, almost as though they were calling her. When the auction entered its final minutes, she felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same one she felt decades ago the first time her father let her sand a chair leg on her own. It was the feeling of possibility. Without letting herself reconsider, she entered her bid. The screen refreshed. She was in the lead. Then someone else outbid her. For a moment she felt her heart sink, and she almost accepted that the universe had simply teased her with something she wasn't meant to have. And then, with less than 30 seconds remaining, the highest bidder suddenly withdrew. No explanation, no replacement bid, no warning. The price dropped back to hers. The countdown reached 10, then 5, then 1, and the screen flashed a confirmation she never expected to see. "Congratulations, you won." Helen sat there in stunned silence, her breath catching in her throat, staring at the words as though they might vanish if she blinked. She hadn't just bought furniture, she had bought a piece of her past, a doorway into a life she once dreamed of living, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to start again in a small but meaningful way. She had no idea yet that the furniture was worth far more than she imagined. She had no idea that inside those drawers and cabinets waited surprises capable of changing her life. And she certainly didn't know that the storage facility's young employee, the one assigned to help her clear the unit, would become an unexpected ally in a journey that was only beginning. When Helen arrived at the storage facility the next morning, the air carried that cool, almost metallic crispness that comes only at the start of autumn, when the world feels suspended between seasons, neither warm nor cold, waiting for something to tip it forward. She parked her aging sedan near the row of storage buildings and stepped out slowly, her knees reminding her that excitement and stiffness often travel as a pair. The facility stretched long and quiet beneath a pale sky, its rows of green doors forming a kind of industrial canyon. It looked ordinary enough to anyone else, but to Helen, walking toward Unit 42 felt strangely ceremonial, as though she were approaching a place where her past and future might shake hands for the first time in decades. She clutched the printed receipt in her hand, not because she feared losing it, but because holding it made the whole thing feel real. The young employee waiting for her, his name tag reading Evan, looked barely 30, with sleeves rolled above his elbows and an easy posture that suggested he was used to heavy lifting. When he saw her approaching, he straightened, offering the kind of genuine, unhurried smile people rarely give unless they were raised well. He introduced himself with a calm warmth that reminded Helen of the way her late husband used to greet customers at his hardware counter. No rush, no pretense, just the steady tone of a man who wanted others to feel comfortable. She immediately felt less intimidated by the work ahead. Clearing a unit packed wall-to-wall with furniture was a daunting task for anyone, let alone a 72-year-old woman, but the presence of someone patient and capable softened the edges of her worry. Evan unlocked the heavy sliding door and pushed it upward. The metal rattled along its track before settling into place with a thud, and for a moment the world behind him remained shadowed. Then the morning light slowly filtered in, revealing the dense interior that had captivated Helen from the photographs. What she had seen on the screen barely did it justice. Towering wardrobes loomed like quiet sentinels, carved bed frames leaned against the concrete walls, dining chairs were stacked with the precision of a puzzle. There were end tables with marquetry inlays, a roll-top desk with its tambour door halfway open, and even a beautifully aged hall tree whose mirror remained intact despite decades of neglect. Everything was dusty, but intact, and in the way a trained eye could see, undeniably valuable. For a moment Helen felt as if she had stepped into her father's workshop again, smelled the faint, warm scent of wood oil, heard the familiar rasp of sandpaper, saw the dust floating in thin beams of light. A swell of emotion surged through her, catching her off guard. These weren't just objects, they were echoes of a world she loved and thought she had lost forever. She moved deeper inside, trailing her fingers along the smooth curve of a dresser's edge, feeling the craftsmanship in each join and contour. Evan watched her with a soft curiosity, noting the reverent way she approached the pieces, the kind of care that came only from someone who knew furniture not as items but as stories written in grain. They began the slow process of cataloging what they saw, Helen taking notes in her small notebook, Evan carefully shifting smaller pieces toward the light so she could photograph them. He seemed impressed by her knowledge. When she identified an early-century dovetail pattern without hesitation, his eyebrows lifted in quiet admiration. She told him briefly about her father, how he restored furniture as both a trade and an art, how she spent long summers sweeping his workshop floor just to stay near him, how he taught her that furniture was the closest thing humans had to time capsules. She hadn't spoken those memories aloud in years, and hearing them in her own voice made her chest warm, as though her father stood somewhere just outside her line of sight. Halfway through the morning, she found the first surprise. Inside the lower cabinet of an ornate china hutch, its glass doors wrapped carefully in quilted blankets, she discovered a shallow wooden drawer that didn't appear in any of the unit's photos. The drawer slid out with a soft groan, revealing a collection of small velvet-lined boxes neatly arranged in rows. Most were closed. A few were cracked open just enough to reveal glints of gold or the soft glow of pearls. Evan leaned closer, but Helen didn't touch anything yet. She simply stared, unsure whether to feel excitement or alarm. Valuable jewelry kept inside furniture wasn't uncommon, but the organization, the deliberate arrangement, the pristine condition, those things felt intentional, almost secretive. They set the boxes aside without opening them further, agreeing to examine them later once the larger items were safely accounted for. Helen could feel her heartbeat increase, a thrum of adrenaline she hadn't felt since she was young enough to believe life could change in a single afternoon. She didn't want to leap to conclusions, didn't want hope to outrun reason, but there was no denying the reality forming in front of her. She might have stumbled upon something far more meaningful than she anticipated. Not just emotionally valuable, but financially significant, perhaps significant enough to shift the quiet, frugal shape of her life. As noon approached, Evan gently suggested they take a break, but Helen shook her head with a small smile. "If I sit down, I may not get back up," she joked lightly, and he laughed, the sound rolling easily through the spacious corridor. She appreciated his presence more than she expected. Not because she needed help, though she certainly did, but because someone beside her made the work feel less like a lonely task and more like a shared discovery. In his company, the enormity of the project didn't feel quite so overwhelming. Somewhere within the unfolding stillness of that unit, a small instinct nudged her. This wasn't an accident. She didn't believe in fate, at least not in the grand, sweeping sense, but she did believe that life had a way of offering second chances disguised as ordinary moments. She felt that here, standing in a dusty storage unit beside a stranger half her age, surrounded by pieces of craftsmanship that seemed to whisper her father's name. If stories like this make you lean in a little closer, take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps bring more real-life journeys to the people who love them most. And tell us in the comments what state you're listening from. We always love seeing our map light up across the country. As they returned to work, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that this unit held more than furniture and forgotten valuables. Something about the arrangement, the care, the secrecy, it all felt like a narrative waiting to be uncovered. She didn't know yet that the jewelry wasn't the only treasure hidden inside those cabinets. She didn't know that the next drawer she opened would shift the entire direction of her day, her choices, and eventually her life. But the pieces were already in motion, and the most surprising ones still waited, quiet and untouched, in the darkest corner of the unit. By the time the sun drifted past its highest point, the storage unit looked noticeably different. What had once been a tightly packed maze of furniture now resembled a slow, careful excavation site. Pieces had been shifted into organized clusters, wardrobes along one wall, tables along another, and a dedicated section where Helen and Evan arranged smaller discoveries on padded blankets. The unit, once claustrophobic, now felt almost like a private showroom, one that existed only because she had dared to place a humble bid on a day when no one else bothered to look twice. As the space opened, so did the sensation that something deeper was unfolding, something layered like the drawers she kept finding hidden within unexpected places. She was too experienced with old pieces to believe these compartments had been filled at random. The previous owner had placed each item deliberately, as though protecting a history only he understood. Their next major find began innocently. Evan slid a tall, glass-fronted cabinet forward to check for structural damage, and as the base scraped lightly against the concrete, Helen noticed a thin line of gold peeking out from beneath a false bottom. Her breath caught, not from greed, but from the thrill of uncovering craftsmanship and secret compartments, the very things her father had taught her to look for. Together they knelt, carefully easing the board upward. Beneath it lay a narrow metal tin wrapped in what looked like decades-old tissue paper. When she opened it, her hands trembling more from reverence than age, they saw a row of small envelopes organized with crisp precision. Each envelope was labeled with dates ranging from the late 60s to the early 80s, written in the same elegant cursive. Inside the first envelope lay 2 gold coins, both gently toned with age and protected in original mint capsules. The next held a delicate antique brooch with seed pearls arranged in a floral pattern. Several envelopes later, they found a small velvet pouch containing 3 slender bracelets, each finely crafted in a style difficult to replicate today. Helen said nothing for a long time, simply running her thumb over the edge of the pouch as though touching the past itself. Evan watched her closely, sensing her emotional connection but also recognizing the weight of the discovery. He encouraged her to take her time, reminding her gently that they still had hours within their allowed 48 to finish sorting. She appreciated his patience more than he knew. Most people saw old furniture and old things as burdens, dusty relics to be tossed, donated, ignored. But he treated each piece with the same respect she did, lifting and setting down items with a kind of quiet ceremony that proved he understood these weren't just objects. They were memories carved into wood, forged into metal, preserved through time. His presence steadied her heartbeat as she continued through the envelopes, each one adding a little more weight to the growing sense that this unit had been curated by someone who didn't want its contents found easily or by just anyone. As afternoon light softened into something mellower, they reached a particularly intricate dresser, solid oak, with hand-carved motifs along the edges and brass pulls shaped like leaves. Helen recognized the craftsmanship immediately. It was the kind of piece that usually came from small, now-defunct workshops where artisans signed their work with pride. She opened each drawer slowly, savoring the smooth glide of wood against wood. In the third drawer she found neatly folded fabrics, embroidered table runners, and an old sewing kit with spools so faded their original colors were almost guesses. But in the final drawer, tucked behind a row of linens, she discovered a small lacquered box with a brass clasp. The box was light, almost suspiciously so, and rattled faintly when she lifted it. When she opened it, she inhaled sharply. Inside were several small rolls of bills secured by brittle rubber bands, 20s, 50s, and a few hundreds mixed in. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make her throat tighten with disbelief. Money hidden inside furniture was not unheard of, but the combination of valuables she had already found made this discovery feel less like luck and more like a story she had stumbled into by accident. For the first time that day, Helen stepped back and braced herself against the dresser, letting the rush of emotion pass through her slowly. She wasn't a woman prone to fantasy. She had lived a careful, modest life, guided by practicality and good sense. She had nursed her husband through illness, managed her bills with discipline, made sacrifices quietly and without seeking praise. She had long accepted the reality that some dreams belong to youth, not to the slow, steady years of retirement. Yet now, in this dusty concrete room, surrounded by relics of a life she had never lived, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in decades: possibility. Not wild, reckless hope, but grounded possibility, something earned not by chance, but by courage. Evan noticed the shift in her expression and asked gently whether she needed a moment. She shook her head but smiled, admitting she was simply overwhelmed. He told her that most buyers never found anything special in units beyond old clothes and broken furniture. What she had here was rare, a unit filled not with chaos but with intention. His voice, steady and matter-of-fact, brought her back to focus. Together they continued sorting, working with the rhythm of people who understood that careful work was its own form of respect. They wrapped fragile items in blankets, labeled boxes with black marker, and created sections for items to appraise later. Around mid-afternoon, as warm light softened into the golden hour, Helen felt a familiar tug of hesitation. So much value lay in front of her, more than she had handled in years. She knew she would eventually need expert opinions, perhaps even legal ones, to navigate what she had found. But she also felt protective of the unit's contents, as though rushing to a pawn shop or dealer might cheapen the legacy embedded in the grain of each piece. Still, she understood reality. She lived modestly, and while she didn't crave extravagance, financial security would lift a weight she had carried alone since her husband's passing. She could not ignore the fact that the items might grant her the freedom to breathe again. Before she could say anything aloud, Evan spoke up, almost reading her mind. He mentioned gently that when the time came, she should choose appraisers carefully. Not all buyers were fair, especially when dealing with older sellers or collections that looked intimidatingly valuable. He told her stories, not sensational ones, but quietly cautionary tales he'd heard from other customers. Helen listened closely, grateful for the advice. And when he paused, she thanked him with a sincerity that needed no embellishment. In her heart, she recognized a truth she seldom admitted. She had grown used to handling life alone, and accepting help, even from someone kind, did not come easily. If you're still with us in this unfolding journey, take a moment to tap like and subscribe. It may seem small, but your support truly helps stories like Helen's reach the people who appreciate them most. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We love seeing the map fill with voices from every corner of the country. As evening approached and long shadows settled across the concrete floor, Helen and Evan carefully closed the unit for the night. They left with more questions than answers, carrying only a few small boxes of items to examine at home. But beneath the questions lay something steadier, the feeling that she was not merely clearing a storage unit. She was stepping into a story whose ending had not yet revealed itself. And somewhere inside that cavern of old furniture and hidden compartments, the most life-changing discovery still waited quietly in a drawer they had not yet opened. By the next morning, the entire journey felt heavier, as though the discoveries from the day before had rearranged the very air around Helen's small home. She woke earlier than usual, unable to ignore the quiet hum of anticipation that had settled in her chest. After a simple breakfast, she stood by the window, watching the crisp morning light spill across her modest yard, and felt something she had not felt in many years, a sense that her day held possibility rather than repetition. The storage unit had become more than just a gamble. It felt like a doorway into a chapter she had spent decades believing she no longer deserved. With this feeling guiding her, she gathered her notebook of handwritten inventory, a tote bag with carefully wrapped pieces, and the determination that today she would begin understanding the true value of what she had found. When she arrived at the facility, she found Evan already waiting, leaning comfortably against a hand truck as though he had anticipated her early return. The way he greeted her carried a quiet steadiness that eased the nervous flutter in her stomach. Together they unlocked the unit, and the familiar scent of old varnish and aged textiles drifted into the cool morning air. The interior looked exactly as they had left it, structured, catalogued, yet still brimming with mystery under its neat arrangements. Helen took a slow breath before stepping inside, knowing that whatever they uncovered today would shape the path forward. They resumed their work methodically, starting with a towering wardrobe positioned against the rear wall. She opened its doors carefully and felt an immediate shift in atmosphere. The inside contained not just clothing, but bundles of papers tied in twine, sketchbooks filled with furniture drafts, and envelopes containing stenciled patterns used in traditional woodworking. Her father's teachings came rushing back. The smell of timber dust, the fascination of tiny design notes, the magic of turning raw materials into something living. Holding the papers, she realized the previous owner had been much more than a collector. He had been a craftsman preserving his entire creative life inside these walls. Their next step required patience. Tucked in a corner behind the wardrobe, they discovered a row of shallow drawers built into what looked like a custom display unit. Each drawer slid out with the gentle resistance of well-oiled wood. Inside the first lay catalog cards listing provenance details for several older pieces she had not yet identified in the unit. The second drawer held early-century cabinet-maker stamps pressed onto small wooden tokens, samples used by furniture makers to track commissions decades ago. But it was the third drawer that held something entirely unexpected, a velvet-lined tray containing a set of miniature tools, each made of solid brass, crafted with astonishing precision. Helen recognized them instantly because they were the same type her father once cherished, a symbolic set given to apprentices upon completing formal training, a tradition long gone. She lifted one in her hand, feeling its surprising weight for its size, and the emotion of connection surged through her. In that moment she understood that this unit held not just value, but lineage, stories passed down through hands that loved the craft as deeply as she once had. As the hours progressed, the discoveries continued weaving themselves into a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Inside a small roll-top desk, hidden beneath a removable panel, Helen found old invoices from high-end furniture restorers and correspondence addressed to a name she did not recognize, someone who had clearly been commissioned by wealthy families for restoration work. The letters referenced specific pieces, some of which now stood mere feet from her. She traced her fingers across one note that described a restoration completed with uncommon delicacy, and her chest swelled with pride not for herself, but for the man whose hands had shaped these masterpieces. Every detail confirmed that she was standing inside the legacy of someone who had dedicated their life to beauty, craftsmanship, and precision. And as she walked through the unit, she realized she was doing what she had always dreamed of, working with furniture, reading its hidden clues, restoring the lost stories of its creators. It was the closest she had felt to her father in decades. Eventually, Evan noticed her slowing, her movements becoming more thoughtful, almost reverent. He encouraged her to take a break, but she refused, explaining that she was not tired. She was simply absorbing the magnitude of what she had found. He respected her pace, lifting heavier items while she examined the intricacies of the smaller ones. They continued this unspoken partnership until early afternoon, when they reached a sturdy chest of drawers made of walnut and carved so ornately that even Evan paused to admire it. The craftsmanship was exceptional, but Helen noticed something else. The top drawer didn't sit perfectly flush. That tiny deviation ignited her curiosity. She slid it out carefully and found that behind the lining lay an additional thin compartment barely visible to the eye. With slow, deliberate movements, she pried the lining back and revealed a flat tin box wrapped in muslin. The weight of it felt promising. She unwrapped the tin, and inside lay 3 coin sheets filled with older European gold pieces, sovereigns, ducats, francs, each in remarkably preserved condition. A folded receipt sat beneath them, showing the original purchase price from nearly 30 years ago, a fraction of what the coins would be worth today. This was no casual stash. This was curated, intentional, and protected. Helen's heart thudded gently in her chest as she imagined the possibilities, not wild dreams, but practical hopes. She could repair the soft spots in her floor, replace the roof tiles she had been patching herself, or finally take the trip to Maine her husband had always wanted before illness changed everything. These small dreams, saved for later and always postponed, began feeling reachable for the first time. As the day stretched into a warm late afternoon glow, the two of them carefully loaded the most valuable small items into Helen's tote bag, preparing to bring them home for safekeeping. They left the furniture neatly sorted and planned to schedule a pickup for appraisal within the week. Before locking up for the day, Helen paused in the doorway, studying the unit once more. She felt as though she had stepped not into a purchase, but into a story that had chosen her. And through every careful discovery, she kept sensing the gentle push of something that felt almost like fate, the idea that after a lifetime of quiet sacrifice, perhaps it was finally her turn to receive. If you're still following Helen's journey, take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support allows us to keep sharing stories that remind us all it's never too late for life to surprise you. And share in the comments where you're listening from. Our community spans across states, and we love seeing each new voice join in. As Helen closed the storage unit door and felt the metal lock snap into place, she didn't yet know the next chapter waiting for her. She didn't know what the appraisers would discover, or how valuable her findings truly were, or who would unexpectedly cross her path in the coming days. But for the first time in years, she walked to her car with a heart full of anticipation rather than routine. And somewhere inside the stacks of furniture she had yet to examine, the discovery that would change her life forever still waited quietly in the shadows, ready to reveal itself when she returned. When Evelyn woke up the next morning, she found herself feeling the kind of quiet steadiness she had not experienced in many years, as though the world had gently shifted in her favor for the first time in a long while. The memory of yesterday's appraisal still lingered in her mind, not the shock of the numbers or the unexpected worth of the furniture, but the moment when the young man in the pawn shop stepped outside to stop her, speaking with genuine concern rather than the cold calculation she had come to expect from people who sensed vulnerability. She had replayed that conversation several times throughout the night, hearing again the calm firmness in his tone as he explained that the clerk inside had tried to undervalue her items by more than half, hoping, perhaps, that a lonely older woman would accept whatever she was offered. Yet instead of letting her walk away with far less than she deserved, he stepped in, told her the truth, and even gave her the name of a reputable appraiser who worked independently and built a reputation on honesty. It was an act of decency that surprised her, not because kindness was rare, but because she had almost forgotten how it felt when someone offered it without wanting anything in return. As she made her morning tea, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe deeply, noticing how the kitchen, worn though it was, suddenly felt brighter. She thought about her husband, George, and how he used to encourage her to follow her instincts, to trust the voice inside her that still held a spark of youthful boldness. She imagined him smiling at her from across the small table the way he used to when she repaired a chair or polished an old cabinet, admiring her care and her touch for wood. She had always viewed furniture not as objects but as quiet witnesses to time, pieces that carried the weight of stories, meals, memories, and hands that had shaped them. That belief followed her into the present moment, where a storage unit full of forgotten furniture had unexpectedly reopened parts of her heart she had packed away after he passed. And now, with the appraisal scheduled for the afternoon, she understood that this discovery was not simply about value. It was about rediscovering a purpose she had never allowed herself to fully embrace. By early afternoon, the independent appraiser, a calm, silver-haired woman named Marjorie, arrived at Evelyn's home. She carried herself with a kind of elegant competence, the sort that made Evelyn feel instantly at ease. Together they walked through the garage, where all the furniture from the storage unit had been carefully arranged, each piece cleaned, photographed, and gently labeled by Evelyn over the last 2 days. Marjorie took her time examining each cabinet, table, dresser, and chair, running her fingers lightly along the wood grain, checking the joinery, lifting corners to inspect the craftsmanship. With each assessment she made small, approving sounds, and occasionally paused to name the maker or describe the era from which a piece originated. As the minutes passed, Evelyn realized she was watching a professional who appreciated furniture the way she did, not as merchandise, but as the final product of human hands guided by patience and intention. When the appraisal was completed, Marjorie sat beside her at the kitchen table and gently turned the handwritten estimate toward her. Evelyn's breath caught. The numbers were larger than she had expected, far larger. The combined value of the furniture alone was enough to change her life in ways she had never imagined. To repair the roof that had troubled her for years, to replace the rusting car that made her nervous every time she turned the key, to finally take the woodworking class she had dreamed of joining but never allowed herself to afford. And that was before adding the value of the small box of coins and jewelry they had found hidden inside one of the dressers. Pieces that, according to Marjorie, were made of genuine gold and dated back several decades, likely kept as keepsakes by the original owner. Evelyn felt overwhelmed, not with greed or disbelief, but with gratitude so deep it made her eyes warm. She thought again about the young man from the pawn shop, whose honesty had steered her away from being taken advantage of. Without him, she might have accepted a fraction of this appraisal, never knowing what she truly had. She reached for her cup of tea but paused, allowing herself a rare moment of pride. For the first time in many years, she felt seen, not as someone fragile or easily misled, but as a capable woman who had trusted her instincts and been rewarded for her courage. The next morning she returned to the storage facility to finalize the paperwork and thank the young employee, Daniel, who had helped her move the furniture when she first opened the unit. He greeted her with the same gentle friendliness he'd shown that first day, though now she sensed a quiet respect beneath his smile, as if helping her had meant something to him too. When she shared how much the appraisal had come to, he blinked in astonishment, shaking his head with a soft laugh. He told her he had always believed there was something special about that unit, mostly because of how carefully the furniture had been arranged. People don't stack their belongings like that unless they loved them, he said thoughtfully. His words echoed something within her, something she'd felt the moment she saw the first cabinet. An unmistakable care, a tenderness. Evelyn did not forget that he had spent hours lifting heavy pieces, guiding her through the process, and refusing to let her work alone. She offered him a portion of the earnings, not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire to thank someone who had stepped into her life at exactly the right time. To her surprise, he tried to decline, insisting he had only done his job. But she pressed the envelope gently into his hand, telling him that some kindnesses deserved acknowledgement and that accepting gratitude was as important as giving help. His eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, Evelyn saw how a simple gesture could ripple outward, shaping a life in small but meaningful ways. Over the next several weeks, Evelyn began selling the furniture through reputable dealers and collectors recommended by Marjorie. Each sale brought not only money but also a deep sense of fulfillment. knowing these carefully crafted pieces were going to people who would appreciate them. As her bank account grew, she noticed a shift in herself. She no longer hesitated at the grocery store when choosing something a little more expensive. She no longer avoided opening bills. She repaired the roof, scheduled long-delayed medical appointments, replaced her old car with a modest but reliable one, and even enrolled in a woodworking course at the community center. The moment she picked up her first set of carving tools, her hands trembled, not from age, but from realization. She was finally doing something she had dreamed of since childhood. One evening, as she stood in her workshop sanding the leg of a small table she had begun building, she found herself thinking about the strange chain of events that had led her here. A storage unit she had almost skipped, a collection of furniture that felt destined for her, two honest people who appeared in precisely the moments she needed them. She had not been looking for a miracle, only for a small adventure to break the quiet rhythm of her life. Yet what she found was a path back to herself, to the part of her that still believed in possibility, in craft, in second chances. The moral of her journey was simple but profound. Sometimes the world still rewards courage, honesty, and kindness. Sometimes life waits for you to take one brave step before showing you what it had been holding for you all along. And sometimes, even at 70, the heart finds new reasons to beat with hope. When she finished the table, she signed her initials beneath it, IM, and set it proudly in her living room. It wasn't the most valuable piece she owned. It wasn't the most beautiful, but it was the first she had ever made. A reminder that new beginnings don't come with age limits. And every so often, when she passed it, she ran her hand gently along the smooth wooden surface and whispered to herself with a quiet smile, "George, I did it."